this panel, I'd like to welcome Duncan Clark, who is from Stanford, who is first going to give a research blast about some research done by Stanford about what the VC scene looks like and the startup scene looks like in China. This is some research they've done over a number of years looking at China through the optic of Silicon Valley. Take it away, Duncan.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everybody. It's very cold in this room. Esther, our co-panelist, had tweeted for help, and so I lent her the jacket. I've just got it back. So perhaps move your arms around, stand up if you're feeling a little chilly. For those of you from Hong Kong, you're sweating in here, obviously. But so again, my name is Duncan Clark. I'm chairman of BDA China and also part-time at Stanford. And as Tom mentioned, we are following the development of China 2.0, which is really the emergence of, one can almost say, a new China within the old China, and which is what we're really talking about. As we saw Planet Social, you can apply that to, the social planet in China as well. I don't actually have the clicker. Yes, I do. Okay. So it's an ongoing research and education initiative. By the way, now you can put on your 3D glasses. If you're finding the screens a little hard to read, that's because you're not watching in 3D. There's something about the pixelation, or maybe it's just me. Maybe it's absolutely clear for you, but I'm having some problems with it. But anyway, we all know that China's big and all that. But what's interesting is not only that China's big and that the companies coming out of China that we're hearing about, like Tencent and Baidu, who we're having speak at our event soon, but also it's the companies that are coming up very quickly that could be very big globally because they're big in China, or some are actually growing outside China very fast, but are based in China. So one thing we're doing is an ongoing analysis, is looking at the network analysis, firms, people, ideas, individuals, how this is all coming out of China, how it relates to Silicon Valley. I'm going to be very brief, but basically we have a network analysis which you probably can't see based on the pixelation. But since '91, we've been mapping all of the investments, venture capital and PE investments in China, and we continue to do that. And the closer you are to the center of this map means that you're more interconnected. The width of the lines, which you can't see, distinguishes you from others in terms of the amount of capital and also the amount of relevance. But basically, what we've done is we started to see geographically, this is, if you can make out, Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen in 2000 at the top. We sort of mapped the investments back then. Those of you who were around for the first dot-com experience, you remember it was a sort of very briefly lived sort of thing, 99, 2000. But we started to see, investments happening in those cities. And if you fast forward to last year, you can see now the density of investment activity in these cities. I haven't shown others, but now we're seeing a growing amount of activity in places obviously like Guangzhou and Chengdu and Hangzhou. So it's not one place in China. I mean, that's the first note. It's really happening across the country. And of course, the early investments were very much influenced by Silicon Valley investors. I mean, there were not many local VC funds, and that's been completely transformed in the last few years. So the nature of the location of the activity, the nature of the investments is changing. And one thing here, we actually look at it by different industry as well, because we're not just looking at internet, but our focus is internet. The top left is, after years of research, we've concluded that, the internet investments make it look like a network. You're like, wow, that's really useful information. But there's clearly many co-investments. You can contrast this with, say, the consumer products at the top right, where we see these very long chains of investments. One investor in a company as opposed to multiple co-investors. You see, very different types of activity, very heavy capital-intensive industries like semiconductors. You have a relatively few number of investors into a relatively few number of investees. But the internet is different, and social media is even more so. The amounts of co-investment, it's basically reflecting social investment, if you will. And so we're going to be tracking that. And I think this is something I found which I don't understand because it's for an astrophysicist, but it's about, this is a wormhole, allegedly. But basically, I think when we think of China and Silicon Valley, increasingly, there are parallel universes to a great extent. Those of us who are very familiar with Facebook may not be familiar with Tencent and Baidu or Renren and others, but and vice versa. I mean, it's almost that they're not connected, particularly obviously in China, to some extent due to censorship, but also due to the very strong local content advantage of these companies. But they are connected. The people behind all these companies are flowing back and forth. And one thing I was just chatting with Steve is it's not just China versus Silicon Valley. we have a lot happening in Japan and Korea, which is influencing China and vice versa. And how all of these various areas are connecting to each other is really interesting, both in terms of the people, the investors, the ideas, and the trends. And Steve was just, I think, will be addressing some of his experience in Southeast Asia as well, and South Asia. For example, the fact that Tencent is actually influencing very much developments in Southeast Asia and South Asia, perhaps more in some cases than Facebook, in terms of the people, the ideas that are coming out of Asia, perhaps due to local cultural issues, perhaps due to the proximity. So basically, the Silicon Valley has evolved over the years since the 60s and has had several waves of investments from semiconductors to today's social experience. But this is the first wave in Silicon Valley which is truly international, it's truly global. And I think there's a lot of room for optimism, actually, for the connectivity between all of these. So I'm going to cut my remarks short because we have limited time. But we have an event at Stanford. If you're there on the 28th of September, we have Robin Lee from Baidu and John Huntsman and others talking about the China-US experience in the internet. We'll have an event in Beijing in March as well. And so I'm going to cut short now and invite the other panelists to come on up.